As soon as you're ready, please accept. Okay, thank you very much for that. So the other thing I'm going to ask is, please, for the sake of to avoid interferences or to avoid us. Sorry, I was muted there. Okay. So if you're not speaking, please remember to mute yourself to avoid background noises coming through and sifting through. But if you do want to speak, you can unmute and then speak. So thank you very much for coming today. I welcome everyone here present onto this open discussion titled Black Psychosis: Undoing the Damages of Slavery and Colonialism on an African Mind, on the or the agenda of that on the African mind. And I'm going to start by introducing myself. I'm Wenaroni. I'm a member of the ARN team here at the well, I'm a member of the ARN team, and most of us in the team happen to be studying at University of Birmingham, but we're not no such affiliation really. But you're all welcome. And I'm going to allow other team members here present to just introduce themselves to us. So I think Austin is also going to.
Yeah, I'm Augustine Farinola. I studied philosophy at the University of Ibadan, first and second degree, and I'm working on critical theory and digital humanities in the Department of English Literature at the University of Birmingham in the UK. So thank you very much, and that's by myself.
Okay, thank you very much, Austin, for that. So I'm also Wenaroni. I'm also studying at the University of Birmingham in the civil engineering department, dealing mainly with numerical data and interpretation of numerical data from certain civil engineering equipment. That's my own submission. I would like if others who are here present, maybe you want to introduce yourselves just for familiarity. I'll see others. I think I'll start with is Akinpelu Oyekunle. Are you the fact that this network is a very interdisciplinary network, having people from different kinds of fields. And if we had more of the people in the network who were available to be at this discussion tonight, we would have seen more of that. How people have different disciplines that they are in, and yet coming together to this common goal. And the reason for this network is to bring together African scholars, especially those living in diaspora, and with the view of bringing together a collaborative effort of bringing Africans and African research into a much more globally relevant state, and also to try and address problems or issues that have been some form of problem or some form of hindrance to either African development, or issues that have been left or swept under the carpet in African history or in Black history, and all those kinds of things. So different webinars that we've been doing over the months have reflected that, and it's been interesting. It's been good. You can go on the YouTube channel where we have this records or this recorded videos on there, and so very interesting things that I feel that have been done, and good effort from the team and from the members of the network. So with that short introduction of the team and of the network, I'm just going to describe the agenda for today. So it's the discussion is on Black psychosis, undoing the damages of slavery and colonialism on an African mind. And the agenda for the day is we're going to have an exposition of some key points. Next from Austin, who has some selected articles that he has been gleaning over the few days or so. And the first one is white supremacy in Eurocentric, or in Eurocentric epistemologies. Then the second article is going to be gleaning for us is decolonization of the West, desuperiorization of thought, and elative ethics. And the third article is going to be gleaning for us is embracing a decolonial epistemological and pedagogical approach. And then the fourth one is decolonial philosophical praxis and development. And then the fifth and the last paper that he would be gleaning for us, that he has gleaned and will be sharing with us, is Desuperhumanizing Whiteness. Desuperhumanizing Whiteness. And then after his exposition, we would have our guest speaker for today, Dr. Bjorn Frete, who will be speaking for some 15 minutes about some questions that have been raised through the exposition that Austin is going to be giving to us. And then we'll have some interventions from you, the members of the participants of this discussion, and anybody, if you have anything you want to raise, any discussion you want to put forward, you would have some 10 to 15 minutes where everyone would put things together and say one thing or the other. And then Dr. Bjorn would be responding to those statements or those remarks, and would also give some comments as he wants to submit to us. And then after that, we'll have a closing remark. And so our guest speaker for today, Dr. Bjorn Frete, he's a registered member of the ARN and an independent German scholar. He was awarded a PhD in philosophy at Free University in Berlin in the year 2014. Now, interestingly, he is not an academia in the sense of university tenure professor, but rather he engages with scholarly activities through publication while earning his living as a quality assurance engineer, and he's been doing that for quite some time. Now, he has lectured or taught philosophy and superiorism as a guest lecturer at University of Paderborn in Germany. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Otherwise, forgive me. This is on record, so it's unbelievable. But anyway, it's in Paderborn, Germany. Yeah, for over 8 years, and he's devoted part of his time to teaching Berlin gifted students on a voluntary basis. Now, what is unique about Dr. Bjorn, and why is ARN having a conversation with him? Well, Dr. Bjorn seems to be one of the few European voices condemning the epistemic injustice that has been perpetuated by colonialism and the academic hypocrisy surrounding the current decolonization agenda in Europe and in America. Now, in tackling this, he has given over 54 lectures at international conferences and workshops across the globe. And he has published along with renowned African scholars like Jonathan Okeke, Chima Konam, Edwin Etieyebo, Ike, Elvis Mafidon, Benda, Offmeher, Marie Ebo, Gunter, Bomberts, and our humble ARN member, Dr. Elvis Mafidon, which I've already mentioned. So it's a mouthful, and we're so happy to have him here today. He is so gracefully agreed to be at the meeting today and at the discussion today, and to be our special guest. And we hope that the discussion will be fruitful and will bring us a lot of insights, and will be a platform for us to exchange ideas and to be a birthplace for greater things as we all hope to achieve. So the next thing now is going to be inviting Austin to give us the exposition of key points from his selected articles. So please remember to mute your mic if you're not speaking to avoid interferences. And also remember that the meeting is being recorded. And if you have any questions or any submissions while someone is speaking, just please use the chat box and we'll be responding to them. And people might be answering you on the chat box, or will raise the points during the times of the discussion. So I hope you enjoyed the meeting today, and I hand over to Austin.
Thank you very much, Winner. Actually, I'm not going to give a talk because we are all aware of the materials he has shared with us before the time, and he gave us access to some of his articles as well as other works that some of us may be familiar with. And just to stimulate the discussion and to see how, like when we say the title for today's discussion is Black Psychosis, and it's not like we are fusing the topic into him, but we find him from his work that there are things that we need to also address as Africans in the effort towards decolonization and addressing every forms of epistemic injustice. So I will just highlight some of the basic points from, like, is the article which is titled "The White Supremacy in Eurocentric Epistemologies." He made mention of things that we need to do, And I feel to a great extent it speaks simultaneously not to European scholars alone, but also to African scholars. And it calls for the European scholars to, and the African scholars to initiate a second enlightenment. And from the issue of ideas, we know the Enlightenment period and all that it perpetuated. But for Frete, it's all more of colonial violence. And then he also talks about how we can maintain a desuperiorizing outlook. You know, the mindset that some people already have, that some are superior to the other. And he told us about the whole thing about how we approach the European Western epistemic framework in whatever areas that we are working on, be it philosophy or engineering or whatever, the need to actually tell the stories in an unabridged way, and also to know that there are some lenses at which we can look at some of these things and to check our positionality and to know the prejudice that are embedded in some of these works. And then we still find that some of these points, you know, reoccurring in other articles that he has written. And most importantly, he talks about African contributions to discourse, to the global intellectual discourse, and not to shy away from that. And in the article, Decolonization of the West, Desuperiorization of Thought and Elative Ethics, you know, he invited us, like one of the major things he invited us to do is to question those who try to belittle the colonial violence and the way in which the West, especially most European leaders and other scholars in Europe, try to avoid the colonial guilt by undertoning, you know, the injustices embedded in colonialism, not just in the taking of land and other things, but also in the continuation within what is being taught, even after the end of colonialism and all that it involves. So he talks about the whole need of, like one of the major things is talk about the whole danger embedded in not decolonizing. And one, he has to talk about the colonial patterns will continue. And then we're going to have a situation whereby, you know, the self-understanding of the Africans, they'll begin to see themselves as superior, where the others, and they will see themselves as inferior. And as they relate to other Europeans, the whites, they relate to them like inferior, relating to the superior, and those one relate vice versa. And then we're going to still have this effort made across the globe to soften the story. And from my own reading of Richard Tanner's The Passion of the Western Mind, as well as William Longhead's Voyage of Discovery, we can say all about the Western, or the history of the Western education and Western ideas is all biased. But he sorted out an important aspect, which he called contempt. And in his words, he talked about Western thought is contemptuous. We must stop, you know, exploiting Africa in our imperialistic way of life. We need to understand that to stop exploitation is not a restriction of our way of life at all. It's nothing but a celebration of our freedom to practice what we preach. And that is Dr. Frete talking to his colleagues, to the Europeans, to the white folk. And then we have the article with the colonial philosophical praxis, exemplified through superiorist and assertive understanding of development. And here he tried to address the whole issue, whole thing surrounding colonial violence. And he acknowledged the efforts of most of our great African writers and all the effort they have been making to uproot the colonial legacies. But for him, he believed that it's not just Africans that can get that done. The others, the Europe and America, need to concretely do that, according to him in that article. And in the next one, which is Desuperhumanizing Whiteness, this looked like a recent one, yet to be published, but he shared that with us, yet to be out. It will be out this year. And he addressed the whole thing surrounding this Black Lives Matters and why some people feel it's not about Black Lives Matter, it's all life matters. And this is what we witnessed in just past months, and it showed a lot of things that has not really been addressed, and why we cannot say the past is just the past, but we can see some of this reoccurring. And this last one, even though this one is prior to some other papers he has written, it's still something going on. The old syllabus that is being studied in Africa, as well as in all these great minds and all biases, racism, and discrimination embedded in their work. And then the question that still remains standing, according to him, is can white supremacists be enlightened? So at this point, I think I've not done justice to his papers, but I've just highlighted some things that are essential to our effort to undo the damages of colonialism and slavery on African mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Austin. I'm just going to, yes, so thank you very much for that, Austin. And I'm just going to pass over the mic straight to Dr. Bjorn.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Augustine and Winner, for that's it's very strange to see one's own work referred to oneself. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's very interesting to get some insights on how that is perceived. And of course, it's especially interesting to get insights on how this work is perceived from Black scholars, because as you noticed correctly in my work, I address African scholars and I talk to my African colleagues, but to a large degree, I talk to my European or Eurocentric or Western or white colleagues. And I try to talk to them, or I try to address a couple of issues that I think are until today mostly ignored. And what my main issue is, I changed a little bit my terminology, but the program is pretty much the same as I try to point out in this decolonization of the West, which is, of course, why the West would have to be decolonized, which is, of course, a matter that I try to point out. I think decolonization, not from African scholars, but from Western scholars, is until today mostly understood as something that has to be done by African scholars. The African scholarship, African universities, African philosophy, wherever you want to, whatever you want to highlight, is understood as as a science of subjugated people, of suppressed people. They have to get to themselves. They have to find themselves again, and then develop their very own philosophies. This paternalistic approach is something that I find quite often amongst Western scholars. What I do not find, or very, very rarely, of course, there are some great exceptions, but it's absolutely not the standard understanding from Western scholarship, from the Western scholarship's point of view, is an understanding that it is not only the one who was colonially violated that needs to recover, but also those people who were the colonial aggressors. And it seems to be a fairly big misunderstanding from Western philosophy that they have to change nothing in their mindset. From my point of view, I think decolonization is a twofold process. And that twofold process is, of course, on the one hand, what I try to phrase as atseridation from the African side. So it's the coming back to oneself, who were forced to abandon what they were. That would be the choice of the African scholars, the African philosophers. And I don't think that African philosophers need a Western, a European, or a white support. That is a genuine African or Black, or you can also apply it to other cultural circles, a genuine Asian, a genuine Australian, or whatever, wherever marginalized people are. That is their task. This is not our business. But on the other hand, there is the point that I like to phrase either as desuperiorization or desuperhumanization, and that is something that that happens very rarely. I think what Western scholars need to understand is that predominance, or the dominating paradigms in philosophy did not occur because of the greater value or the greater depth of thought from Western philosophy, but this is merely a matter of colonial, or however you want to call this form of aggression. It's a form of dominance, a form of aggression. So what we white scholars need to understand is that when somebody philosophizes, that person will not necessarily end up within Western paradigms. That person can also end up in completely different paradigms without undermining the philosophical value of what that person's philosophy is about, or what that person tries to address. I think there seems to be still an understanding that whoever philosophizes will at some point philosophize within a Western understanding, and there's still an ongoing, very deep contempt towards African philosophy. When I gave lectures on African philosophy, which I did a couple of times in Germany, I was always approached before and after my lectures that people were surprised that there is something like African philosophy. And you know, this is this buddy racism, this oh, that is great. Oh, I love that the African people are having their own philosophy. How good for them. You know, it's this very paternalistic, derogatory, contemptuous look on African philosophy. And usually my example is, if I would tell in Germany someone that I'm working on political philosophy in Bulgaria of the 20s, everybody would say, oh, how interesting. What was that about? But when I addressed the philosophy of a whole continent of more than 1 billion people, suddenly very high regarded philosophers, professors of philosophy in Germany will look at me and ask me, what, there is something like that? So in this contempt, this imperialist approach to philosophy, I think, needs to be broken up. And from my point of view, the foundational problem within this thought is not necessarily just ignorance. It's not necessarily that there's a lack of knowledge. It's a will to a lack of knowledge. It's an intentional ignorance toward African scholarship. It's not very difficult to find African scholarship. It's not very difficult to get into collaboration, into communication with African scholarship. I think there's a genuine disinterest, and that genuine lack of interest has only one reason. It's a superiorist understanding of oneself. It is an implicit understanding of the African mind, of the African philosopher as inferior. And so everybody will immediately oppose, but I am not a racist. I do not look down on African people. And this is why one of the reasons why I shifted from calling this racism to calling it superiorist, because I don't want people to evade this argument that you are looking down on someone. And then you, by complicated measures, try to point out that you are not a racist, or that Hegel wasn't a racist, or Kant wasn't a racist. Okay, I'll give you that. I agree for a moment. Let's agree that Kant is not a racist, but he's still a superiorist. He's someone who considers himself to be intellectually superior to other people, not only Black people, but also women, disabled people, homosexual people, and thus he is normatively higher than them. I don't mind if somebody's more intelligent as someone else. The point is that in Western thought, usually Western thinkers infer from their superiority normative a higher position within the normative hierarchy. And from that normative higher position, they usually infer the legality of domination. Since I am better than you, I am entitled to tell you what to do. And this has become over time more sophisticated. So if we look into colonial discourses from the 18th century, we will find people pointing out that sorry to say that word, that the Negro has to be enslaved, because if we don't enslave him, he will start to feel bad. He will get sick. So what we're doing is actually helping the Black person. So why has that been done? The only reason why that has been done, because there was a clear understanding that to do this is wrong. But on the other side, there was a clear interest to have all the things that you can have if you enslave people. If I force on my plantation to have 100 people working against their will without any loan, then I can have more things. And I think that is in the end the vulgar basis of it. People just wanted more, but at the same time they felt bad about it. So you needed a myth, a story, a legend, narrative that would explain why, even though you do something that looks on the first look bad, is actually a good thing. And this, from my point of view, has brought forth all these strange inventions of the black person has to work, or the black person will get too lazy. The black person has to be beaten up because everybody in God's creation has to be put in their place. And it's unfortunately our white destiny to help the black person into this form of salvation. And this, shockingly, has not changed a lot. It got more sophisticated in the sense that the racism or the superiorism is not as blatantly obvious. So what has happened then is, for example, that the colonialism with British officers in the colonial, Belgian officers in the colonially exploited countries, that is no longer the case. It has simply, the enterprise of colonialism has been given up because it became too risky, it became too expensive, but it immediately has been substituted with a form of neo-colonial exploitation that now is based rather on economical, or is rather based on an economical framework than it is on a political framework. But the underlying mythology is the same. Now it's not the law, or now it's not the nature of the black person that we have to force that black person to work. Now it's the pseudo-naturalness, for example, of the free market. The free market determines the situation within the global situation. And if Africa is in a tough position there, that is not our fault. That's just the nature of the market. So all of this continues to be possible because the Western scholarship or Western people continue to maintain their understanding as superhumans, while disguising themselves as regular human beings. But they continue to exploit black people, Asian people, marginalized people of all kinds, while at the same time trying to inaugurate themselves as the world's foremost moral authority. And that is what I like to phrase in the following terminology. African people have to rehumanize because they were dehumanized by Western people, by white people. But what is forgotten is that white Western people have to desuperhumanize themselves, because we, white people, are just humans and not superhumans. So it's not about raising the black people to superhuman level in a patriarchal kindness, helping them up into the sky. It's the white people have to come down from the sky and back down on earth and understand that we are only a part of humanity, and our philosophical endeavors are part of what the human endeavor per se in philosophy is. And interestingly, I have found a lot of understanding for that position from African scholars and significantly less understanding or appreciation from my Western colleagues for that, which I think is very telling, not in the sense that I am necessarily right, but in the sense that I'm rarely ever getting even some sort of appropriate comments, or just, you know, if you don't agree with me, philosophically challenge me and tell me why my position is wrong. But usually I just get, you know, I get the comments like, you just want to be the nice guy here, right? You just want to be the guy who's friends with everyone. Well, I honestly, I don't know what would be so bad about that, if that would be the case. But I think the main problem is what I try to address as it's the silent social contract of contempt. If one of us stops being imperialist, having an imperialist mindset, everybody else who continues to have this imperialist mindset will learn it is possible. but they don't want to learn that it is possible, because if they learn that it is possible, you can no longer use the excuse as that is just the natural course of things. If you show that it is possible to collaborate on eye-to-eye level with African philosophers, even though they probably foundationally disagree with the paradigms within you, from within your work is starting, then you break this narrative of your own superiority. And I think that people do not like that. And it's fairly obvious, because I think this is fairly parallel to what happened in the feminist philosophy. That was pretty much the same there. When feminist philosophers finally themselves heard, who wanted to ignore, to learn that life is now becoming more complicated. And I think this is one of the main issues. People simply do not want to give up their privilege to simply write a world history of the philosophy, and it starts with Plato and Kant, with Plato and Aristotle, and goes through Kant, through the modern continental or American philosophy, and completely disregards about, I don't know, 80% of what's going on in the philosophical world. So yeah, to wrap it up, I think the main issue within Western philosophy is the continuous misunderstanding of Western philosophy as the philosophy and not as a part of the human endeavor of philosophy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for for that really interesting talk, submission, and comments. I really enjoyed some of the things, very enlightening statements that were made, and some key points which I had to make a note of just as you were speaking just then. And it's one of the things, because one of the things as you were speaking that came to my mind was, how can we drive at a solution to the problem that we are perceiving? Mm-hmm. And I think it's just as I was thinking about that you made mention of that the foundation of the problem, which is what I usually try to picture and say, okay, we are noticing this problem. Where is the source of it? What is the root of it? And how do we attack it? And so you mentioned that the foundation of the problem is not a lack of knowledge, but rather a will to a lack of knowledge, a will to, or a lack of the will to observe or to accept or to even explore another worldview, another perspective, or to even see it as something worthy of communicating with or interacting with. And you know, as you mentioned, one of your experiences after giving a lecture, and then you mentioned that you've come with some African philosophy, and you're teaching on that, and they're wondering, so such a thing exists. Why wouldn't such a thing exist? You see, but that is that is part of the thing. So I was really interested. I was really I was interested in that particular comment, and is the genuine disinterest, which is one which I think was the main, or the pillar of your view of what's going on, is a genuine disinterest, a superiorist understanding of oneself, which is what sort of maybe amplifies or the Western philosophy as the philosophy, and makes most Western philosophers observe themselves or see themselves as, or their worldview, or as the main thing to work with. And so I'm really happy with that session. I think we're going to have some. This is a period where participants can have things to say. Please indicate by raising your hand virtually, and we can call you to speak. There are some questions that have come in, but I'm going to give priority to participants. If anybody has something to say, if you want to say, or otherwise, I would just ask some questions as they've come into me. So do I have anyone who wants to either ask a question or give a submission to what has been said before I ask my questions? Or let me see in the comments. Before okay. So with the whole and one of the things before I ask the question, because the line of thought that has been going through is that legality of domination because of perceived superiority. that sort of the view of this oppressive sort of worldview is legalized just because, well, is superior to that, or is superior to the other one, or to whatever else is coming along. And the first question that has come to me, drawing on that line, I think is, what do you think led to the radical shift in the 19th and 20th century in which the latter Western education contradicts the former to show superiority of thought and being? And I think that the asker of the question will come in to do some further explanation, but I want your first thought on that question. What do you think led to the radical shift of the 19th and 20th century in which the latter Western education contradicts the former to show superiority of thought and being?
Can you maybe explain to me a little more what, in what way has that shift happened? What are you referring to there specifically?
Yeah, I think the question seems to address the whole idea of Augustine in the whole history of Western thought. We have Augustine, we have Plato in the ancient period, we have Thomas Aquinas in the medieval period, and then we have Descartes in the modern period. Then all of a sudden, with the idealists and Hegel and others coming up, down to David Hume, Kant, and even to the logical positivists and everything, the whole understanding of thinking and being and the idea of man has exempted the black man. And that's one of the major things that we begin to ask. Like, according to your work, you will say it's an evidence of contempt in Western idea. But what do you think led to the radical shift? It kind of, we have such a huge contradiction.
You mean the radical shift in that sense that the superiorism got more dominant, not less dominant, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is a mixture of reasons, and I think it is a strangely accidental reason. I think it has to do with the fact that Western people expanded their worldview by literally traveling to places that were so far or rather unknown. And I think that especially with the so-called discovery of the Americas, the necessity for an explanation, or the necessity of the question arose for in this time, and it's a fairly large time from the 15th to the 18th century, what to do with these people. What are we actually allowed to do with these people? I think the necessity for a more aggressive superiorism arose because the question, can we exploit people, arose. And these people were simply not known of before. I have to be very careful here because I don't know if I have enough historical knowledge, but what I try to explain it with the Americas. When the Americas were found, the question came up, this is a resource. Can we exploit that resource? And to justify the exploitation of that resource, theories needed to be made up. And these theories needed to be made up for our own good. It was, it's like when you do a scientific experiment and you pretty much know what the outcome should be. So you manipulate the single parameters as long as you finally in the end become the result that you want. And so I have to think about Jesuit arguments that from Jesuit patres that were exchanged, where they clearly address the problem that they have a bad conscience exploiting and buying and selling slaves. So they talk to each other in a very academic and all in Latin on a very high, sophisticated philosophical level, and they want to find out how can we continue this and have a good conscience. It does not, what does not come up, shouldn't we stop this? Isn't that the wrong thing? So, and why is this discussion there? This discussion is only there because there was an exploitability. There were suddenly people that were exploitable, and you needed a justification, especially from the if you talked about Augustine, especially coming from the Christian paradigms within Western thought. if God created the humans and if God created the world, how can it be that that there are humans that can be exploited? So you needed a story for that. And I think in the 17th, and especially then during the Enlightenment, which I try to criticize most, the problem came up that with the pre-industrial revolution and with a further expansion of the Western worldview, Western thought started to think globally in a political sense, especially when it comes to Kant and Hegel. But also that was also true for the French Revolution. It was also, for the French Enlightenment. It was also true for the British Enlightenment. So I think my answer to the question is, why was there a shift? Because there was a dire need for an explanation why what we are doing is right. And the same happened within with the Western world when the actual Industrial Revolution happened, because the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century was a revolution which was done on the shoulders of the poor. And then you needed an explanation why the poor can be exploited. So the Western paradigm looks down on those that are the other people, the alleged other people. But at some point, they also started to exploit themselves. When that comes during that time, when that happens, I think we see a similar movement or a similar upcoming of philosophers trying to defend why it is possible to exploit the poor. And then we get, and it's very present where I'm right now in the US, this myth of meritocracy is still very present. If you say that everybody, if they work hard, they can achieve something, then you can say to every single poor person, well, apparently you didn't work hard, so tough luck. That's your fault. And that is nothing else but a modernized way of the old legend of how can I justify myself to be a terrible person while advocating myself to be the moral authority. And I think in the Western world, no other country exemplifies that like the US, who continues to show itself as the moral authority of the world while being a country with now that I live here for about a year and a half, I have never seen racism this blatantly and brutal and vulgar than here. So I think to wrap it up, I think that shift has to do with the fact we continue to exploit, we exploited more and more aggressively, and we needed explanations why we are still good people. And I think that has to do with the fact, well, why Kant and Hegel, together with the biologists and ethnologists, predominantly Linné and Blumenbach, and as a very important counterpart, Georg Forster, who opposed these positions, tried to argue for not a philosophical, but a natural difference between white and black people. It was always important. My Immanuel Kant's opinion is just the nature of the world. So, and I think, yeah, it got a more dire need to do that. So that's a pretty disgusting answer, a pretty disgusting testimony for Western thought. But for I think that's it.
Thank you very much for that answer, because I noticed that it had the same kind of frame of answer with one of the points that you mentioned in your earlier submission, which is that there's a disguise as regular human beings whilst actually perceiving themselves as superior. And as you summed up or wrapped up the answer to that question, is that the paradigm reconstruction is needed to justify the actions that are being perpetuated. And that's just the simple answer to the reason why the shift had to happen, and why the so-called contradiction seemed to be there. But it's to justify the actions that are being taken. And before I call Austin back, there's a question from Elvis, and I think you might be able to spot it in the chat box.
Yeah, I see. What systems?
Yes. What systems must be put in place or uprooted for the West to desuperiorize?
Yeah, I agree with you, Elvis. That is a I would love to be able to answer that question. I'm not sure if I can. So I am currently working on a paper that tries to address that, and it's pretty terrible. The work is going pretty terrible because it is a very overwhelming question. The change that is necessary is of such dimensions that I am absolutely sure in my lifetime, I will not see that change anymore. And I have to look at the question again. It will be such a massive amount of work that needs to be done from multiple points of views. Of course, I'm predominantly speaking from the point of view of the philosopher. I think some things are surprisingly easy to do. I think a desuperiorization of the curriculum of universities has to happen, and that desuperiorization of curriculum has first of all, we have to stop idolizing the heroes of philosophical history. What you need to learn when studying philosophy is to do philosophy and to study philosophy, not philosophers. I know that studying philosophers can be very helpful to study philosophy, but I think it is fairly important that we focus more on ideas, on thoughts, on systems, paradigms, however you want to address this, and stop the glorification of the heroes of the past. And that, on the one hand, has to do with the fact that a lot of those heroes from the past are not very good people that we should try to emulate. And that is true for pretty much all the figures that have been named, from Augustine to Kant. There's a lot of very, very dark sides to these people, and I don't know how effective it is to emulate those. I think what we have to do as philosophers is primarily a decolonization of the curriculum. And what has to be understood in the West is that a decolonization of the curriculum is not a matter for African or Asian philosophy departments. It's also a matter for our philosophy departments. And this desuperiorization of curriculum it's not only necessary to take into account African or Asian or Australian scholars. It's also important to take into account female philosophers, homosexual philosophers, old philosophers, young philosophers, non-academic philosophers. The problem is when you open most philosophical histories from the 18th century until today, and you're a homosexual man, or you're a lesbian woman, or you're just a woman, you will not find yourself represented within that. So if philosophy means, in the most general sense, a human way to deal with the world, to deal with oneself, to deal with moral problems or so, we have to broaden the philosophical perspective, and we have to probably learn to live with the fact that we will not find definitive answers to a lot of philosophy's problems. We will find partial answers. We will find answers that might hold true for a certain amount of time. So all this weird understanding of Western philosophy to find definitive answers that then can be applied to the whole world, I think that might be one of the first steps we need to undertake. And another thing that I'm struggling because I feel I'm not qualified to actually address that issue, but I think one of the foundational moments that Western thought has to work on desuperiorizing is the pseudo-naturalness of capitalism. Capitalism is taught as something that whenever a rational being has the chance to do something that will give that being more and another being less, that will be done. And it's not only irrational to not do that. Very often, you can imagine whatever. You go to a store and you get £5 back more than you actually are required to get back. And then you give that back, and most people will say, what kind of an idiot are you? That was for you, just keep it. So I would think that is just a mythology. It's the mythology it's a pseudo mythology, a pseudo anthropology of the human being that just wants more and more and more. And I think it would be very important that the Western world understands that his whole moral self-understanding foundationally contradicts the economic system that it forces upon the rest of the world. And we also have to understand that if we stop forcing this on the rest of the world, we would still live a good life. So in Germany, children are not allowed to work, but you are allowed to wear a shoe that has been sewn together by a Bangladeshi child or by an Indian child. So I think what the West has to do, and this might be a broad answer to this broad question, but we have to become the people we claim we already are. So if we think human rights are important, we cannot import goods from a country where homosexuals are beaten with a stick in public. And if we take human rights seriously, then we cannot only take human rights seriously of the human rights within the boundaries of our nation or of the Western world. Then we simply cannot say, you know what, we will not flood Nigerian markets with the chicken that Europeans refuse to eat because they are too old or the quality is too bad. Then we have to take these things seriously. So I wholeheartedly think if we would try to just be the people we claim we are, we would make a significant change in the world.
Thank you very much for that for that response. On a lighter note, I just wanted to ask if all your hoodies say desuperiorize.
Yes.
Just imagine looking through your wardrobe and then every single shirt says desuperiorize. Anyway, I have more questions for you, and an interesting question just came in from Bjorn. I'm sure you can see that in the chat.
I cannot agree. Are you reading out?
Oh yeah, okay. Let me just read it out. I cannot agree less with the submission of Bjorn that the West need to desuperiorize. Given my experience of the Black South Africans here in South Africa, I noticed that a number of them are carrying within them the notion of apartheid. To the point of paralysis. Now, in the sense that they cannot undo the notion, not the experience, of apartheid to the point of not willing to give themselves to the requirements of a progressive humane living. So how can we turn around your idea of desuperiorization? And this is the point where, when I read the text, I noticed that you mentioned something like this, not just that the West needs to come low, but that there needs to also be a restoration to normal. And I think that's what Bjorn is asking here. So how can we turn around your idea of desuperiorirization of the West to what I call the de-inferiorization of the Black South Africans on the notion of apartheid, especially when they seem to have what it takes to move on from apartheid? Okay, I think, okay, yeah.
I just have to read through it again because that's a very interesting point.
And I think if Bjorn is also there, he's
raising his hand. I think he wants to speak to that.
I think it's another person that raised their hand.
Okay.
But if Bjorn,
Bjorn can speak to that.
Yes, you can speak to that, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think what I'm simply asking in a nutshell is I quite understand the idea of the West needing to desuperiorize, and that is very, very interesting. But I try to contextualize your notion of desuperiority now to the environment that I found myself in South Africa here. And what I noticed among the Black South Africans, even among the young students here, is that they have taken the notion of apartheid, of course, the experience of apartheid and the way they were marginalized in the era of apartheid. They've taken it so much upon themselves to the point now that they cannot see the options that they have before them to make them move ahead, move forward after apartheid. So my question is, your idea of desuperiorization now, I so much wish I could turn it around to tell or to encourage the Black South Africans who need to de-inferiorize this time around to realize that they have so much to move forward from the experience of apartheid. Thank you.
Yes, that is of course a very good question, and it is of course a question that came also to my mind, and but I feel I'm not entitled to answer that question. Of course, within a discussion with my African colleagues and in a workshop or in this interaction, of course, I'd be more than happy to provide what I think about that or to provide input in that. But I felt very reluctant writing about it because I don't feel I have the right to tell my African colleagues how to de-inferiorize themselves. Because from my impression, when I started reading African philosophers, was very quickly, if there's one thing these people do not need, it's an introduction on how to do philosophy. And even if I would feel that they need an introduction of philosophy, I am very aware of my positionality, and I'm very aware of the fact that if they do philosophy differently, they do philosophy differently. I mean, honestly, if I read 1,600 years ago, that's immediately the mindset that I have. I have to, can you hear me? Is there a problem with this? Yeah, okay. I have to adapt myself to that way of thought, not only because it's a long time ago, but also because it's a Christian philosopher and he addresses issues that I probably do not understand. So I'm very aware that African philosophers are faced with challenges that I have never experienced in my life. I work on issues that are not, I don't think that there are quite a few philosophers who do not think of what I do in very high regard. I think there are a lot of Western white philosophers who think, he wants to change the world. What a little dreamer. And the same thing happens when I work about phenomenology of love. Once I was told, so you want to be a good stepson at some point or something. You know, it's philosophers are jerks sometimes. And I know that I'm looked down upon sometimes by philosophers, but that has nothing to do with the experience of inferiority a Black scholar has to go through. So who am I to talk to those who were inferiorized? I'm a heterosexual white man. I am the most privileged human being you can imagine. The only thing that makes me not at the top tier of privilege is that I'm not rich. But if I were rich, I would have it all. I can travel anywhere I want with no question asked. So I made a very conscious decision to not address how African philosophers could de-inferiorize themselves. And that might be a bit disappointing to give that as an answer to the question. All I would say to that is, in fact, do philosophy and continue to do philosophy. And if my white colleagues are not listening, it's their fault, not your fault. Because if there's one thing that truly frustrates me, if we look in the history of suppression of homosexual human beings, of female human beings, of African or Asian or Latin American human beings, who made the change? It was virtually never that the white man sat at his desk and realized, you know what, I think we made a mistake. I think we should not suppress women. No, it was women who got up and say it's enough, or it was Black people. The civil rights movement in America happened because Black people said it's enough, not because white people said we understand we made a mistake. So what we desperately need is the understanding of Western culture and white people as those who need to stop to imperialistically inferiorize the world. And that is sort of where I see the task that I have to answer. So I'm sorry that I really cannot answer that question.
Could I come in here?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I want to note that, and this is Kwame Shabazz, I wanted to note that South Africans in South Africa had the same stereotypes or similar stereotypes about Nigerians, immigrants in South Africa, right? And also Black immigrants have similar stereotypes, or some do, about African Americans in the United States when they immigrate to the United States. That is to say that when they immigrate to a place, they say that, look, the Black people here aren't taking advantage of their opportunities. They're blaming it on apartheid. They're blaming it on Jim Crow. And I'm here as an immigrant. I'm working hard, and things are happening for me. Why can't they do the same thing? So part of the problem, I think, and I think I like your answer when you said you can't really answer this question. You're correct. Part of it has to be communication between Africans.
Yes.
And start repeating stereotypes about each other. And note that when you stereotype South Africans, you have to look deeply at the Nigerians. Why are you a Nigerian in South Africa? If Nigeria is on top of things, why are you in South Africa? Likewise, with the immigrant in the United States, if you're on top of things in Ghana, why are you not in Ghana and you're in the United States? And likewise, if you're South African and you're stereotyping Nigerians, don't you remember when apartheid was going down, many of your people had to flee. They were in exile in African countries. And so we Africans have to stop stereotyping each other in these broad stereotypes about, South Africans not understanding their condition or not taking advantage of their opportunities. The issue really is that a Nigerian in South Africa doesn't really understand the impact of apartheid on South Africans locally. Likewise, South Africans don't understand, the psychology, the philosophy, the impact or the impact of colonialism in Nigeria on on Nigerians. And so we just have to have better communication with each other so we don't promote these opportunities. That's the first step. And then I think that once we do that, the actual problem can be addressed. But it can't be addressed if we keep reproducing these ideas about the mentality. I also wanted to note too that Steve Biko addressed it specifically, right? He founded the Black Consciousness movement to address how apartheid has impacted psychology of South Africans. But he didn't just limit it to South Africans. He also said that this is a colonial problem that all Africans need to address.
I absolutely agree with Biko here, and with Fanon and with César. It is the problem seems to be, and that's the Western bit of the problem. There might also be an internal African problem, but the problem is, of course, that colonial minds did not only break. Especially Fanon tried to explain that it broke the Black self-understanding, and that.
Could I just add one more point though? I just wanted to stress too that we also have to think about how has all this impacted the mind of white people?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Who go around the world colonizing, pillaging, raping, stealing, dominating. What has been the impact of the false claim of superiority on the philosophy, the psychology, the mentality of white people? I think that's probably where the real problem is the psychology of white folks. And we haven't addressed that.
And that is pretty much where I try to jump in, because I cannot speak to the African experience, and people of African descent, Black scholars do not need my insight of what I think their experience is. That's completely irrelevant. But what I think, and I agree with you, and I think Biko and César and Memi for the last bit, what you said, taught me a lot there, as that did something to our self-understanding too. We have a history of raping and pillaging and killing and murdering, and we are very at peace with that. And the lack of the lack of self-reflection and probably disgust, or the lack of understanding that is a form of pathological way to deal with the world is a significant problem. So, address quickly your point of view. Nigerians are perceived in South Africa and the other way around. That really harmonizes with what I heard from other people. I lack that experience, but it seems to be the case. But of course, I mean, to someone else and to be, am I still there? And to be, and to be offensive towards other people, that is of course also possible for other people. The difference between othering of, for example, South Africans of Nigerians is that what white people did is literally set the world aflame. And that has not somewhere else. So it's a usual excuse that I've heard many times. Yes, but you know what? Nigerians can also be racist. And I would say, yeah, okay, I agree. But when did they come to Europe and exploited us? So they didn't. So that's a factual reality. We have to live with the fact that that happened. It is a possible reality that Nigerians can exploit Europe, but it is a factual reality that Europeans exploited Nigerians. And I'm sorry, Western people, but that factual reality is a little more important than that possible reality. Yes, maybe it could have happened, but it didn't. You know, the firefighters go out factual fires, not potential fires. So that's just the way it is.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bjorn. Because we're working with time, I'm going to bring in some other people who have raised their hand. I think I'm going to start with Akinpelu because he's raised his hand for quite a while. So please go on, and then I'm going to bring in Dr. Sidney because I think he also wants to submit something.
Oh yeah. So
Akinpelu, please.
Thank you so much, Oni. I appreciate Dr. Bjorn for the wonderful, beautiful presentation you have made. I really appreciate it, especially the idea of coming back to oneself. And it's so important to the discourse of decolonization, considering Wiredu's idea of conceptual decolonization. I want to quickly leave all that and go to my question. Picking my question from the earlier idea of Dr. Heavis about decolonizing the curriculum. My question on that is, I've been ruminating since the discussion is going on. How can we be practical about decolonizing our curriculum or decolonizing education in Africa with the research setting that has been schemed to idealize Western perspectives? And I'll just give an instance. For you to be recognized in the academia, then your product, your research has to appear in quote and unquote celebrated journals. And there are gatekeepers for these so-called journals that when you put out, from my personal experience, I sent out an article for publication last year on reconceptualizing African philosophy. And my thought was all about African philosophy. The editor said, the paper came back and I was told what I'm saying does not fit it into the current thought about African philosophy. I'm talking about reconceptualizing something. You are saying, so when we have issues like this, then what can we really do to decolonize African philosophy or African thought or education in Africa?
Thank you very much. I'm going to give Dr. Bjorn some time to think about that whilst I bring in Dr. Sidney. Dr. Sidney?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The question was asked, what can we do to turn the situation around? Most of my investigation and experience when it comes to these kinds of matters has been done in West Africa and in Nigeria in particular. And when I look at the history of colonization in Nigeria, and I think what I say about Nigeria might hold true to Western Africa, maybe other parts of Africa that were colonized, the secret weapon of the colonizer, or the secret weapon of the colonization of Nigeria in any case, was Western literature. I don't know if any of you know what the first book that was ever published in English in Nigeria, what that book was, or the system of education that was set up in Nigeria. what that system was. The first publication in English in Nigeria was a Bible book. It's a Bible book. And the Bible, that was the first publication, the first books that were published in Nigeria. And the school system was set up by the churches. The foundation of, at least in Nigeria, of education, the foundation of the educational system was laid down by the missionaries. And all your great schools in Nigeria have saint in front of them. From the primary all the way up to the higher institutions of learning. So now we are living in an age and a time where the neutralization of this intrusion into the African consciousness can be easily overcome. We're living in an age of information that has transcended any time in the history of this planet. There is no excuse for ignorance. We have unlimited sources of research and information that can turn this consciousness around. And I think that a revamping of the educational system is the greatest thing that we can do to turn around this, what we call the decolonization of the African mind or African religion or whatever you want to call it. Education, I think, and where does it start? Well, we're starting it. It starts with us, and it's up to us to continue this kind of dialogue that will hopefully swell to a critical mass. I mean, this is not something that's new that we're doing, but it's just, it has to swell into a critical mass. When I look at what happened in the United States with the Civil Rights Movement, for instance, you know, what it was that brought it to a head was the media. President Kennedy and President Johnson were tired of seeing these images on TV of Blacks being victimized. And the same thing happened now. The social media is responsible for what we see happening with the discussion about race today. Now we're using the same media. We have the same resources at our command to decolonize the African mind or decolonize information or decolonize education. And so we have, I think that this is a good way in which we can pursue demystifying or decolonizing the Western influence upon the colonized masses. And I'll leave that.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Sidney. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Bjorn now to submit his responses.
Yeah, with regards to the first question, which was in the end, if I understood it correctly, mostly a question how to decolonize the African curriculum. I fear I have to repeat a little bit the answer I gave to the previous question, that I don't feel I have the right to answer to that question. These twofold processes that I try to explain, that decolonization in my understanding is on the one hand adseridation and on the other hand desuperiorization. I usually try to focus on the desuperiorization because that is the question that I can speak to. The adseridation is more or less, it's more or less just a metaphor it's like an umbrella concept that I try to use to say that part of a decolonized world has, of course, to be that Africans consider themselves to be Africans and no longer consider themselves to be, I am as African as I am allowed to be in this world before somebody, whatever, prohibits me to do it, or before there's a continuous colonial control of my mind or of my body or of my nation, my land, and so on. So the most important bit if that would be the answer that I would feel confident to give in the decolonization of the African curriculum, is certainly the discussion of African languages versus colonial languages, most importantly English and French. I think that is an important discussion to reintroduce African languages into the African philosophy, to philosophize in African languages, and to take into consideration the tremendous consequences that, for example, the grammatical structure of the English language has onto philosophy. It is widely known within Western philosophy that the grammatical structure, the grammar, the literal grammar of Greek philosophy led Plato to produce his idea of the idea, because it was possible to create a substantive out of to create a noun out of an adjective within Greek language. So there's a tremendous effect, and I'm as uneducated.
It's like, sure, panel, I want to get my voice out too. So this is something a lot of people are saying, that gatekeepers of knowledge, they're saying we should decolonize, but they are holding the gates and blocking.
No, I mean, it's ridiculous. So we're not really interested in what you're saying, but we would like you to work for free for our conference. So yeah, well, wow, how gracious of you to allow me to work for you for free. So I agree with you. It is a significant problem. And of course we have to think, so what to do? Do African philosophers have to train themselves to, how to say it, so to speak, to speak the language of Western academic discourse, so to speak, to infiltrate with their ideas the Western publication, or, and that's of course the problem, or do European and American and Western philosophers simply need to learn to also read a Nigerian journal that has only, that's probably not even printed, or there are just 200 copies and that are sent out by mail. So that is a massive problem. But the point is, I mean, this is even true within the Western context. If you publish whatever in the Danish Journal of Philosophy, nobody's going to read that. But if you publish in the Oxford Classical Studies, honestly, nobody's going to read that too. But it's going to have a quite a significant change on your CV. So even within the Western scholarship, there is a ridiculous obedience towards numbers and algorithms. And even within that scholarship, the gatekeeping works. And even within that scholarship, a lot of people are simply suppressed. It is quite astounding how uniformly certain discussions are going, and how much you have to search to find proper counter arguments. And I mean, that is very understandable. If you have a paper and you send it out 10 times and it's going to be rejected brutally 10 times, simply because it is not in harmony with the current discourse, we are again at the problem that I addressed before. Western scholarship is not as open-minded, is not as interested in different approaches as it pretends to be. If you look at the policies of journals, a lot of papers should be accepted, even though I, as editor or reviewer, probably wholeheartedly disagree. I have accepted papers where I said, I absolutely disagree with every single argument, but they made me think. So maybe they make somebody else think. So the philosophical audience needs to decide that. That is, I think we are simply not doing the work we're pretending to do. If all the journal policies you read on their website would actually be adhered to, and if it's the same thing with job advertisements, we are looking for a creative mind who has fresh new ideas. No, you're not. You're looking for someone who gives a Plato seminar and a Kant seminar and is not a jerk in the next meeting of the faculty staff and
European
to become
approval.
African. No. I don't even think that you need to know European philosophers. I think if you read Plato, you can learn a lot. But you don't have to read Plato to be a wise man. I mean, famously, when the so-called sage philosophy was finally appreciated within the African philosophers, I mean, these are people who have never heard of Plato and have never heard of Democritus or Aristotle, does that make their philosophy inferior? No. Does it make their philosophy different? Yes. But that's a point I try to stress and again. We have to learn that when A is unequal to B, that does not implicitly mean one of these two is better. It means one of these two is not like the other. And that's it. African philosophy is, I don't really know yet. African philosophy, probably in 100 years, we will find out there's a significant difference. These people are more involved with that kind of questions, and these people are more involved with that kind of questions. Okay, that's a difference. But we have to learn to understand, to accept difference as difference, and not difference immediately be followed up by the question, okay, which one's better? Not important. It's important for you. It might be important for your personal life to understand this is more my philosophy and this is less of my philosophy. But there's a certain development within Western philosophy that it got more depersonalized over here. I'm not adhering to a philosophy. I'm adhering to the truth.
And
I would say you have to be a little careful there. How do you know that your philosophy is the truth? And honestly, why is that necessary to? It's your truth. I'm not arguing that it is you, but you have to understand that your truth might be a different truth than my truth. And what I usually try to say that, materially we are different, but formally we both try to just find out what to do. And we try to find out how to deal with what do I do when my friend lies to me? What do I do when my partner is having a bad day? This is the questions that we all have to answer, and we answer it from the understanding of our reality. And we have to address political, societal questions from a point of view that we adhere to, and we just have to live with the fact that that is different from another point of view. And especially here in the US, you have all the time, you feel a movement of de-individualization. It's everything has to be streamlined. There's no, here in the US, for the most, there's no discussion about guns or abortion or if the woman should stay at home. Of course, guns, yes, women stay at home. There's and if you do not agree to that, you get alienated. This is not how philosophy works. But to wrap that up, I absolutely agree with you, Dr. Davis. African philosophy needs African philosophy. And if other philosophers listen, I think you should get into a dialogue. But if other philosophers do not listen, it's Africa. It's 1 billion people. There's enough brain power. There's enough philosophical spirit to just go on. And honestly, it's our loss. It's the white people's loss, not yours. Yeah, but to that it's also the epistemological dominance of the Western paradigm that is a problem here. It is so dominant that even people, even African philosophers who want to do African philosophy feel drawn that to adhere to that. And I mean, there's good ideas. For example, whatever the idea to not plagiarize, to have a certain weight of references, to make things, to make arguments that refer to other scholars, to make it understandable where they refer to. These are all good ideas, and I think they are worth to be thought about. But maybe first of all, maybe there are also good other ideas, how to do philosophy differently. Why would you not be able to do a philosophy in a poem or a story? So there's no open-mindedness for that on the one hand. And on the other hand, come on, relax, Western world. You didn't invent that just out of nowhere. It took hundreds and hundreds of years to develop that. So there's always this conviction of, we know the truth, and it's the truth that was always there. I mean, look in a Western book from 200 years ago, and you go crazy how terrible the reference works in there. And you are, when you look around, it's quite astonishing how many times all the brilliant scholars of the past, how they just blatantly plagiarize each other. Descartes just stole the cogito ergo sum from Augustine, si enim fallo sum, and still he's the founding father of the pre-modern philosophy. So yeah, we have to, man, we just have to be a bit more open-minded towards different understandings of the worlds being different. Why would an Arab really agree with what an African theologian or a Christian theologian or European theologian would think? And why do they have to? I mean, either there's a diversity within humans or not. And I think there's a certain tendency to agree that there's a diversity. Why then do we need a unifying thoughts? We just have to make our positions, and we have to learn to live with the fact that there are other positions, and that those other positions probably are also good positions, even though they are not mine. But that seems to be obviously too much to ask for a lot of people.
Thank you very much for that. Because of time, I think we're going to start wrapping up now, but I see that Dr. Sidney's hand is raised. So I'm going to...
Just a short comment.
Yes, please go ahead.
We talked about Plato, we talked about Aristotle, we talked about Socrates. These are the great men of philosophy. But, you know, I'm taking a page out of Stolen Legacy by James. You know, where did these people get their education? Where did Aristotle go to study?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Socrates go to study? Where did these people go to study? Where did they get their philosophy from?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I would like to see something addressing that, and saying that instead of saying, oh, we are looking to the West for how we're going to frame our philosophical approach to knowledge, you know, I don't think we have anything to apologize about or to appease anyone.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it was a massive paradigm shift that took, maybe it was a development for about 100 years in classics and in philosophy to finally understand that the Greek did not come out of nowhere. They took their knowledge from India and from Egypt. The bit of Africa that Western people desperately for maybe 100, 150 years tried to whiten up a little bit. And you know, Egypt is so great, that's technically not really Africa. A little bit like with Augustine, who's always regarded as a Western philosophy, but I'm sorry, people, he's probably even a black man, and he's an African philosopher. That is very rarely addressed. But there, just on a positive note, there are in fact people who are open-minded to that. So I'm organizing in Germany a conference with a very dear colleague of mine, and that is in a classics department, and we're going to address African philosophy, and we're going to talk about Augustine, for example, why he's not regarded as a black philosopher. So there are indeed a couple of colleagues who try to be open about that, and who are willing to address these issues. But it is absolutely fascinating how long it took for classics and philosophy to accept that that the foundations of Western philosophy were not coming out of nowhere, but that Democritus and Pythagoras and Plato, they were all in contact with literally ancient literally ancient wisdom. When Plato started philosophizing at around 800 BC, the pyramids of Giza were already 2,000 years old. So that must mean something. I'm not saying that those were better or that he was better, but even though he didn't read the pyramid texts, he still was influenced by Egyptian wisdom, and foundationally. And that is something that is in a weird way ignored and pushed aside. It is uncomfortable, and man, white cannot deal with being uncomfortable. No. They have a massive problem with living with the fact that there's a significant finding in the history of thought that has not been found by them.
Thank you very